Very warm welcome to everybody, very, very warm welcome. Especially warm welcome if this is your first evening at Sangha night on a Tuesday. We're obviously going to have to buy a bigger centre. Any donations? So yeah, very, very, very warm welcome. So tonight we're launching a new theme on our Sangha night, our Tuesday night class called... Are you saying I should speak up?
No, just the loop system.
She's giving me a signal saying the loop system's on that.
Okay. I don't know why I'm being told. Can you hear me at the back? Turn it off. Is that any better? No? A bit more? Higher. Is that any better? Is it working? It's not.
Seems like it's on.
Hello?
Definitely on now.
I just needed to put it closer to my mouth. That was all. Okay, so it sounds very loud. So tonight we're launching on a new theme called Stories of the Path. Stories of the Path. What we'll be doing over the next 3 months is exploring a particular formulation of the path of spiritual growth, which we variously call the system of practice, the system of spiritual development, and latterly the 5 aspects of the spiritual path. And this isn't a traditional formulation of the path. It's we owe it to Sangharakshita, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist order. But it isn't just something he made up. It's a very general description, if you like, of the way we grow. It's a bit as though we describe the way a plant grows, first of all putting down roots and then leaves and then producing buds and then flowering and fruiting. And if we describe that, that wouldn't be making anything up. That would just be describing the way things happen. And this path is exactly the same. It's a description of the way we human beings grow. And you might be wondering at this point, okay, why are we going to introduce another formulation of the path? If you just finished the introductory and foundation course, you've already heard about the threefold path, and you've heard about the eightfold path, the noble eightfold path. And if you've been around a bit longer, you've probably heard about the 6 stages of the path of the Bodhisattva and heaven knows what else. So why on earth all these paths? How can they all be valid? How can they all be valid? If one of them is valid, surely the others must have something wrong with them. Well, actually, it's not like that. It's not like that. If you've thought about it, you'll have already realised that the eightfold path could just be fitted into the threefold path. Everything in the eightfold path can be fitted into ethics, meditation, and wisdom. One is just a more detailed version of the other. And most of the different sort of formulations of the path are a bit like that. But Sangharakshita's system of spiritual development is not really like that, or his 5 aspects of the path is not like that. It's not just a different way of carving up the threefold path or the eightfold path. Because the threefold path and the eightfold path mainly look at the external aspects. They look at the practices we need to do, the areas of our life that we need to look at. Whereas a system of spiritual development, the 5 aspects of the path, look at what's happening inside. They look at the internal aspects of growth, the internal changes that need to happen as we grow towards enlightenment. So I hope I've put that one to bed. Why another path? But then you're probably also asking, well, why stories of the path? Why are you going to explore this through stories? Why not just come out and say it? Why not just give us the lists? Why not just give us the Dharma teachings so that we can apply them in our life? We want to learn the Dharma, so give it to us straight. Well, actually, the answer to that is that stories have been the way we human beings learn ever since we sat around a campfire. Stories are one of the most powerful ways that we really learn, really take things in at a deep level. so that we apply them to our lives, so they may make a difference, rather than just having them as intellectual knowledge. To really learn in that way, we have to have our emotions and our imagination involved. And stories are one of the best ways we can involve our emotions and our imagination, so that we learn with our whole being. But if the idea of doing things through stories, looking at the path through stories seems a bit mumbo-jumbo-ish to you, don't worry. We'll give you the lists. We'll give it to you straight as well, but we do want to illustrate them through stories. And we're going to present it in its rational form as well. But also, we really want to make it usable. We're not presenting the Dharma for academic interest. Our whole purpose is to help us to bring it into our daily lives, transform the ways we live, find deeper levels of meaning, uncover our own deep potentials. Okay, so for the next 3 months, more or less, we'll be exploring Sangharakshita's 5 aspects of the path through the medium of stories. So what is that? What are Sangharakshita's 5 aspects of the path? So 5 aspects of the spiritual path. Integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and receptivity. So don't worry if you don't understand what those things mean right now. I'll do my best to explain, and we'll also be looking at this list through a story, using a modern-day myth to illustrate it. But very briefly, first of all, integration. In order to develop spiritually, we need to become a whole person, rather than a divided person in conflict with ourselves. So we need to get to know the whole of ourselves. We need to get to know ourselves. We need to bring all those different parts of ourselves together into a harmonious whole, so they're all pulling in the same direction. That's what we mean by integration. So I'm afraid we start out as a sort of bundle of different selves, held together loosely by a name and a body and a past history. We're different people according to who we're with, differently with our different groups of friends, different with our family, different with our workmates. We're different in different places. We're different in different circumstances. We're even different at different times of day. And one day we decide to firmly do something. I am going to run every morning and get fit, or I'm going to meditate every morning, or I'm going to give up junk food. And we absolutely mean it. And then just a little while later, we're a different person who thinks, actually, it'd be a much better idea to stay in bed. Or to have a snack. We make resolutions with part of ourselves, fully believing we can carry them out, but later in other circumstances it's as though we're somebody completely different, and we do something completely different, with a completely different set of principles to live by. So until we're integrated, we've got no real sort of common direction in our life. We go this way and we go that way. We're just blown this way and that by events around us, by other people, by our own moods. And until we've got some degree of integration, we're not really an individual. We're not someone who can have a goal and stick to it, make their own decisions and stick to them. And also, until we've got some degree of integration, we just don't know ourselves very well. So there's like to be darker, uglier parts of ourselves that we're completely ignorant about. We just pretend they're not there. And because we are ignorant about them, they can control us from the shadows. They sort of cast their spells from the shadows. And we found ourselves being angry or vindictive or jealous or whatever, or selfish. And this comes as a surprise because we think we're really nice chaps or chapesses. We're really rather nice people. And, oh dear, I wonder why I did that. We get really good evidence of this. We see evidence of this all the time with the Metta-bhavana. And I hope this isn't you, but it might be. It was me, okay. So when we teach the Metta-bhavana, we have the fourth stage of the Metta-bhavana. We say, put the difficult person in. And people routinely say, well, I've got nobody to put in my Metta-bhavana. I just like everybody. And then by the time people have been practicing a few months, it's like, there's a queue for the fourth stage going around the block. Okay? And that is not that they've suddenly become much nastier people, it's suddenly, we've got real. We know ourselves a bit better. We're no longer ruled from the shadows by our dislikes that everybody else can see. We know about them, we can do something about them. So knowing that we do have that side to our character is a step forward in integration. Becoming aware of that, we can control it and we can start to do something about it. So that's the first aspect. That's the first of these 5 aspects, is integration. We need to integrate ourselves. We need to become an individual, someone who can make their own decisions and stick to them, someone whose life is about something. Someone who lives their life rather than being lived by their life. Someone who isn't ruled by their moods and passing feelings and other people and events. So we need to become an individual. But we also need to become an individual who's motivated by positive emotions, like metta and gratitude, rather than someone who's motivated by negative emotions like resentment and anxiety. If we're stuck in negative emotions, we're not really going to get anywhere in the spiritual path. So we need to do what we can to cultivate positive emotions and weaken the negative ones. Negative emotions are emotions that cut us off from other people. They cut us off from other people. They cut us off from the world. They imprison us. They imprison us in our own cramped self. They're tight. They're painful. Positive emotions are mental states that connect us to others and the world around us. Through metta, connecting us to others, compassion, joy, gratitude, even a sense of reverence and devotion. These all connect us. And if we try to become an individual, but an individual who's not connected with others, not connected with the world around us, rather than becoming an individual, we become an individualist. We become someone who is cut off, who can't join together with others to achieve something higher than themselves. They can't come together with others who is just out for themselves. And being an individualist is not at all a pleasant place to be or a happy place to be, and it's a spiritual dead end. So, integration and positive emotion. We need to become an individual, and we need to become a connected individual. And then, if we're going to get to where we really could be, if we're going to become the sort of being we really could be, we need, in a sense, to go beyond being a mere individual. And this is where spiritual death and spiritual rebirth comes in. In a way, we have to die and be reborn. The person that we were has to die, and we have to be reborn as somebody else. Because when we're, as it were, defined by our individuality, we're limited in many ways. We're not really free. We're a particular sort of person who sees the world in a particular way. We've got a particular background. We might be English and university educated and read this newspaper and have these views and see things from this point of view. And all of that is a limitation All of that is a limitation. Sometimes we go out of our way, don't we, to sort of, I like that and I don't like that. We go out of our way to build a sort of set of parameters by which we define our individuality. But that is actually just a limitation. It's just limiting us. We see the world as someone with our particular conditioning. We're used to being a particular way. We think there are certain things we can do and certain things we can't do. And yeah, we still see the world from just, even if we're a healthy, happy individual who's integrated and got lots of positive emotion, we still see the world from just one point of view, from behind just one set of eyes. There's a saying, there's no wisdom in one point of view. We need to be able to see things through others' eyes. We need to be able to see things in a more general way. We have our own particular viewpoint, our own wants and our own fears, and these condition how we see the world and how we feel able to live and act. So to grow to our full stature, we need to go beyond that. Having become an individual and a connected individual, we need to let go. We need to let go of being a fixed individual and become, in a sense, more than an individual. Become an individual, become a connected individual, let go of being a fixed individual and become more than an individual. We need to transcend our old self and become something more universal. And this involves a spiritual death and it involves a spiritual rebirth. It involves a rebirth as someone less limited, more free, more universal, less defined by our past, more defined by what could be in the future. Speaking poetically, we could say that our consciousness needs to be transformed, if you like, from being the particular consciousness of one limited individual to becoming something more like the consciousness of the world or the consciousness of reality. And spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, they're not really separate stages, I don't think. They come together. To have a spiritual death without a spiritual rebirth would lead you, I don't know where. So I don't think that talking in terms of spiritual death, talking in terms of doing away with the ego or doing away with the self, that's probably not a very healthy way of thinking about it. Much better, perhaps, to think of going beyond the limited self by, as it were, expanding the self, expanding our idea of who we are and what we could be, to include other people, to include, in a way, the whole world. That's much better than thinking of destroying the self, actually. But for this to happen, we need to be willing to let go of our old idea of ourselves, our old definition of ourselves, our opinions, our attitudes, and our habits. And at the same time, we need to be open to something that comes from beyond ourselves, or seems to come from beyond ourselves as we are now, so that a new and different self can emerge. And only if we're willing to let that happen can something new emerge, which is where receptivity, or one of the places that receptivity comes in. Receptivity, in a sense, is not a stage of the path. It underlies them all. But also it could be, because once a spiritual rebirth has happened, in a way we're dancing to a different drummer. We're not dancing to our ego anymore. We're responding to the call of something higher. We need to be receptive to that. So yeah, spiritual change, spiritual rebirth is not something that we can make happen. We become our new self, but our old self can't imagine what that would be like. And it can't make it happen. So we need to be open and receptive to a new self that seems to come from outside ourselves. And we need that receptivity really at every stage of the path. For integration to happen, we need to be receptive to finding out new things about ourselves. For example, we need to be open, receptive to acknowledging our heights and our depths. So that's a bit about Sangharakshita's 5 aspects of the spiritual path that we're going to be exploring in a lot more detail. And as I've said, this is really a description of something quite universal. It's a description in a way, we could say, of the great universal quest of human beings. The movement towards a bigger self with greater wisdom, more in touch with reality, more in touch with our own deep riches and our own deep wisdom, more able to live a fulfilled life, more able to make a real positive contribution to the world. And because it's a universal quest, a universal path, the different elements of what we call the 5 aspects of the spiritual path, they crop up in myths and stories from cultures all over the world, including ours. In my view, Buddhism allows us to take that journey faster and further than other systems. But people all over the world have a deep sense that developing ourselves in that way is ultimately what life is about. So those elements crop up in stories that give meaning to people's lives just about everywhere. And I'd like to, tonight, just illustrate that with a modern myth, if you like, a modern story. Fairly modern anyway, that quite a lot of us are aware of, which is the Lord of the Rings. So maybe some of us are Lord of the Rings aficionados, and some of us think it's pure rubbish. But if you do think it's pure rubbish, bear in mind I'm going to be talking about the book, not the film, okay? Not the film. The film skims over just about all of the deeper or more symbolic elements in favour of smashing special effects and big action stuff. But even if you don't, even if you do think, well, maybe it's not your style, bear with me, all right? Bear with me. It's quite a mythic sort of story. So a brief plot. So the main character is Frodo Baggins, one Frodo Baggins, a member of a class of beings called hobbits. Hobbits are amiable. They're amiable enough, they're quite nice, but they are self-indulgent, especially with regard to food and drink. They have a very limited view of the world. If they can avoid any sort of challenge, they will do so. They are positively averse to any form of adventure. If left to themselves, they just live a cosy, comfortable life, and they don't do anything at all remarkable if they can avoid it. They're also deeply conventional. They distrust anyone who is at all out of the ordinary, and they dislike anyone whose view of the world is bigger than theirs. They are a bit like the nicer sort of Daily Mail reader. But by chance, Frodo the Hobbit comes into the possession of a great magical ring given to him by his uncle. And this is a ring that gives immense power, but which corrupts and corrodes the character if it is used, especially if it's used for selfish ends. And the Dark Lord Sauron is desperately searching for this ring. And if he gets it, it will allow him to enslave the whole world and plunge it into an era of darkness and terror and evil. And the only way to defuse that threat is for the ring to be destroyed. And the only way to destroy the ring is to throw it into the cracks of doom, the fire on the top of Mount Doom, a volcano in the very heart of the horrible homeland, Mordor of the Dark Lord, which is incredibly horrible, dangerous, polluted, awful place, guarded by lots of nasty beings. And Frodo realises that he's going to have to do that, because this ring has this tendency to destroy, corrode and corrupt anyone who owns it. So in all conscience, he can't give it away. He can't impose that on anyone else. He tries to give it to his guide, Gandalf the magician, and Gandalf refuses it. Gandalf knows it would pervert him. Frodo's got to do this himself. And he's a hobbit. Hobbits don't do things like that. Hobbits think going down the post office is a bit risky. So he has to face the risk himself, the risk of being corroded and corrupted. And he has to undertake to make the terrible long journey through the wilderness, through all sorts of perils and dangers, over mountains into the very, very heart of Mordor, climbing Mount Doom and getting rid of the ring. And this is a challenge about 1,000,000 times bigger than any hobbit would ever think of taking on. But Frodo sees that he's got to do it anyway. He's got to do it anyway, out of love for the world, out of his friendship for others. He's got to do it, although he doesn't really think he's got any chance in hell of succeeding. So Frodo sets out to take the ring to Mordor, and it's a long book, 3 long books. But he passes through terrifying challenges and periods of horrendous suffering with his trusted friend and servant Sam, going through beyond anything he could have thought he could have coped with. But with the help of the magician, Gandalf, and particularly the help of his faithful servant Sam, and a number of other archetypal mythic beings he comes across along the way, and also with the help of deep resources in himself that he discovers, because he has to discover them. He eventually does manage to throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Actually, he's pursued all the way by, as it were, his alter ego, Gollum. Gollum is everything that Frodo could become. And in the end, the ring gets the better of him, and he stands there and says, "I do not now choose to do this thing." And Gollum bites his finger off to get the ring and falls into the fire. So he does manage, part of him in a sense dies, falls into the fires of the volcano. The volcano erupts, etc., etc. The world's going to end. He's certainly going to die. That's what he thinks. He's certainly going to die. But then he's rescued. He's rescued by eagles who come and get him and Sam from the terrible eruptions and the earthquakes that follow the destruction of the ring, and destroys the power of Sauron. But this is amazing. The shadow is completely removed from the world, and a new golden age is ushered in. The world is transformed, and order and harmony reign. Frodo becomes a figure of great renown among the great people of Middle-earth, and eventually he returns to the parochial, narrow Shire of the Hobbit as a completely different person, an immensely larger person. The hobbits in the Shire tend to think that he's mad and avoid him like the plague, because he's now living on a completely different level to them. But his friends and the people of wisdom in the world, the ones who really matter, they know that he has become a truly, truly remarkable person. He's been transformed, and the world has been transformed with him. So that's a very brief outline of the main story. There's loads more. There's loads of subplots and whatnot. So that's the story of Frodo and the Ring, and it's become immensely popular. Not just because it's actually very well written, but also because it's a modern example of a type of myth that exists everywhere that there are human beings. It encapsulates something about the meaning of life. The myth of the journey or the quest through which a character becomes the person they have the potential to be and transforms the world in the process. And it's that journey or quest that Sangharakshita's 5 aspects of the path also describes. So let's look at some different aspects of the 5 aspects of spiritual development. Look, using the story of the Lord of the Rings. How is it depicted in the Lord of the Rings? Well, okay, one feature. So first of all, integration. And one feature of integration is that we need to own up to and get to know our darker motivations and our grungier aspects. We need to get to know ourselves. We need to own up to them. We need to know them so that we've got a handle on them so that we can work on them. Usually most of us think we're really nice people. We turn a completely dark, blind eye to our nastier side, as I explained about the metta bhavana. Our greed, our ill will, our competitiveness, our sneakiness, our aggressiveness, and so on. We see those things in others, clearly. But we think we are uniquely pure. That's how most of us start out. Everybody is always in the right as far as they're concerned. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing. So while we're not aware of these darker, grungier sides of ourselves, they rule us from the shadows. When we do become aware, we have some choice. We have some choice. We can override our darker side in order to live by higher principles. We can get them on our side. And also a lot of our energy is tied up in drives that we maybe don't want to admit to. So to be potent, effective individuals, we need not just to veto those darker energies, we need to actually get them on our side. For example, we've all got aggression, whether we like it or not. We've all got aggression. We can use it in a very destructive way, or we can use it to actually turn it on our real enemies. Perhaps our own negative mental states, etc., our own limitations, rather than turning it into ill will against other people. So the dark side that we maybe don't want to own up to can become a real helper, and we need a helper. And that relationship with our dark side is portrayed in The Lord of the Ring by the relationship between Frodo and the creature called Gollum. I think Gollum's got some sort of historical meaning. Somebody might tell me that. Golem. But anyway, it's called Gollum. And Gollum is a hobbit. Gollum has been a hobbit like Frodo, who once owned the ring and fell under its influence. He used the ring for trivial personal ends, and it's corroded his character. So he is a nasty, ugly, horrible creature. He is everything ugly and dark in Frodo. That all the nasty little seeds that could grow in Frodo, they're in him, blown up to full size. So Gollum is full of craving, he's sneaky, he's dishonest, he's resentful, he's self-pitying, and so on. And Gollum follows Frodo throughout his quest, trying to get back the ring that he once owned. He craves to get it back. He's dangerous and tricky, and Frodo could kill him. That might seem the sensible thing to do. But instead, out of compassion and the recognition that Gollum isn't completely different from himself, Frodo can't kill Gollum. He doesn't kill Gollum. Instead, he tries to enlist Gollum to help him in his quest. And in fact, Gollum is a great help. Frodo could never have found his way to Mordor except for Gollum. He gets him through the dead marshes and over the horrible mountain range. He's always trying to trick him. You can never trust Gollum, but without Gollum, he would never have got to Mordor. So of course Gollum is completely untrustworthy, and our own Gollum is completely untrustworthy. You've got to keep your eye on him. If he's out of sight, he's probably hatching some plot and betraying us, which he does. But if you keep him near, keep him in your conscious awareness and are kind to him, he's a great helper. You couldn't get there without him. So that's an example from the Lord of the Ring of integration that involves getting to know the less likeable parts of ourselves. As I said, not only could Frodo not have got to Mordor without Gollum, he couldn't have got rid of the ring without Gollum. It's only the fact that Gollum bites his finger off that allows him to plunge the ring into the fires. So that aspect of Lord of the Rings is an example of getting to know the less likeable side of ourselves that we don't want to own up to, and getting them on our side, using them. But another different aspect of integration is portrayed by the relationship between two members of the company that set out with Frodo to go to Mordor. They're Gimli the dwarf and Legolas the elf. So the company is chosen to represent, it says, all the free peoples of the world, of which dwarves and elves are two. We could see these as all the different aspects of what it makes to be human are there. And to be effective, these aspects have to stop being in conflict. They have to work together, come into harmony. So Gimli is a dwarf, and dwarfs are rugged, rough, practical creatures of the earth. They live underground, they mine metals, they're skilled in metalwork, they love making things. They have incredible strength and endurance. They're solid and tenacious, both in their grudges and in their loyalties. They're hard and they're aggressive. They're the earth, if you like, personified. Whereas Legolas is an elf. And elves are ethereal, refined beings, light as air. Their footprints leave no track in the snow. They're into music, beautiful music, and poetry, and the beauty of the stars and the beauty of the living world. They have no sympathy with the sort of nature-destroying industry that the dwarves go in for, mining and messing things up. And dwarves have no sympathy with the namby-pamby preciousness of elves. And their self-righteous ways. Dwarves are rough creatures of the earth, elves are refined creatures of the air. We all have a bit in both. We all got a bit of both in us, and they're often in conflict. Dwarves hate elves, and elves hate dwarves. That's just the way it is. So when the Fellowship of the Ring sets out with Frodo, Gimli the dwarf and Legolas the elf are often at each other's throats, or specifically, Gimli is often at Legolas's throat. But partway through their journey, something happens to Gimli the dwarf. Against his wishes, the company goes into the elf country of Galadriel. It's ruled over by an elf queen. Galadriel's a mythic figure, if there ever was one. She's a female embodiment of empathy and compassion and the power to create beauty. And Galadriel can see into people's hearts. And Gimli, of course, is hostile and suspicious and resentful of her. He thinks she's trying to spy out what's going on in his mind. So he's introduced to her and she looks into his mind and he hates it. But then he has a flash of insight, a sort of theophany. She is probing his heart and he looks into her eyes and he sees not an enemy, he sees nothing but understanding and sympathy and love for him. And he is suddenly completely bowled over by Galadriel's very undwarf-like, refined, angelic, heavenly beauty. And in an instant, he becomes a complete devotee of Galadriel. She's got him. He'll do anything for her. He carries a lock of her hair around it with him wherever he goes as a holy object. He's immediately ready to leap into a fight with anyone who so much as mentions anything wrong with her. And suddenly for him, elfishness, refinement, airiness is not something to be hated and ridiculed, it's something to be reverent towards. And because of, he sees that it's something higher than he is, and he wants to be its servant. And so because of that, his relationship to Legolas changes completely. They become firm, inseparable friends, and the two together become a real force to be reckoned with. So as well as getting to know our darker side, integration also involves getting to know what we could call our higher side, which perhaps is what Legolas represents for Gimli, our more refined, airy side. Because it's actually not socially acceptable, actually. It's not socially acceptable in our society to have a higher side, often. So, yeah, I mean, if we start talking about our meditation experiences at work, or videoing ourselves making offerings at pujas and showing them at work, this is not acceptable. So because of that, we're often completely out of touch with what we might call the divine in ourselves, the higher, our connection to the higher. The psychiatrist Jung talked about the repression of the divine. He argued with Freud. He said it's not just the horrible things about ourselves that we repress our higher nature as well. So that's illustrated, coming to terms with that is illustrated by the story of Legolas and Gimli. Positive emotion. Positive emotion. So the terrible power of the ring to destroy people's characters is based on the fact that if you use it with any sort of negative emotion, that negative emotion becomes more and more powerful until it completely dominates you. When you use the ring, you get karma on steroids. And what makes Frodo the Hobbit a suitable character for the ring, carrier for the ring, is that he doesn't really want power over others. And it's the fact that the hobbits have such a, boring as they are, they have a terrific capacity for friendship and loyalty to one another. That's what really characterises them. And that's what insulates Frodo and his friends from the power of the ring. He's relatively immune. It's his positive emotion that means he can take the ring to Mordor. In fact, the book is full of examples of positive emotion that has a positive effect and negative emotions that have a disastrous effect. Just one of those examples is the fact that neither Frodo nor Bilbo, his uncle, could kill Gollum out of compassion. And in the book, the wise magician Gandalf tells Frodo that the only reason the quest might succeed is because of compassion that was showed. So this need for positive emotion, just a hard fact of the spiritual life. It doesn't matter how much we meditate or how deep our understanding of Buddhist philosophy is, or how clever we are, how much insight we think we have. If we don't have positive emotions like metta and compassion and gratitude towards others and the world around us, we'll get precisely nowhere. Because we'll be a disconnected individual rather than a connected one. So that brings us along to, if you like, spiritual death and spiritual birth. Spiritual death sounds a bit daunting, but if we're going to change in a positive direction, we need to be willing to let go of our old idea of ourselves. In a sense, we need to die. We can't have a spiritual rebirth without some sort of death. And The Lord of the Rings it's completely a story about spiritual death and rebirth. The most obvious example of that is what happens to Frodo when the ring eventually goes into the fires of hell, fires of Mount Doom. As far as Frodo's concerned, that's the end. Gollum plunges into the fire. He thinks he's going to die. The volcano erupts, there's massive earthquakes, blah, blah, blah. It's like the end of the world. At that point, Frodo can hardly remember the Shire that was his home. And the old, comfort-loving hobbit that he used to be is just a dim figure of the past. He can't even remember it. His whole experience is dominated by his suffering and his grief. And part of him goes into the flames with the ring. But as a result of that, the world is transformed. The shadow of Sauron leaves the world. The rightful king of Middle-earth, Aragorn, is put on his throne. And in his palace, the golden tree, which has been dead for decades, years, eons, suddenly flowers. I don't know how long, a long time. Suddenly flowers and produces a seedling that grows into this beautiful specimen. And Sam spreads some magic dust around the Shire, and everything just blooms and blossoms like it's never been seen before. The grass is greener, the crops are better, everything tastes better, even the beer tastes better, apparently. The babies born in that year are all beautiful. Everything is brighter, more intense, tastier and sweeter. Frodo is transformed. His old self has died. He's a completely different person, almost transparent, he's described as. And the world is transformed. The two go hand in hand. When we are transformed, we experience the world completely differently. And we also have a transformative effect on the world and on other people. We bring joy and light into the world. So the Lord of the Rings is so popular because it describes these really fundamental aspects of our growth, the way we grow. And it illustrates in quite a gripping way, in loads more ways than I've actually been able to bring out. I had to sort of scrap loads of examples because it's already gone on too long. So this illustrates, I think, that this system, this aspect, is not something artificial made up at Sangharashtra's head. It's simply a description of the way things are, the way things happen. We need, in a way, to go through these stages in a big way. It's not like we do one and then the other and then the other. It's more like, well, we can't do the later ones more than we've done the earlier ones. So there's a sort of sense of sequential about that. But also, we need to be doing them all at once. We need to be doing them all in a smaller way at the same time. We do need to sort of think. It's very helpful to think of our development in terms of this. So how can we help to bring that about? Okay, just a few things to round off. We're going to explore this a lot more in the coming weeks, but a few things to round this off. Integration. One of the keys to integration is actually mindfulness, awareness. The mindfulness of breathing is a great help. And one of the things about the mindfulness of breathing, it helps us to know what's going on in our mind. The golems become apparent. And we don't go, oh my God, there's a golem. We accept it. We accept it in a sense, accept it that it's there, but not accept that it should rule us. We become aware of what's going on in our minds, both in the monsters, but also the higher elements. It can also be like Gimli the dwarf looking into the eyes of Galadriel and seeing something amazing. Both can happen in meditation. But perhaps even more important than that is that we can use meditation, as it were, to create a place at which we can look at our mental states and our moods and our passing emotions, which is higher than them. We can create a higher place to stand, where we can allow our moods and our emotions to come and not rule us. That's part of integration. We need to be able to stand back from our passing mental weather and be an individual, not ruled by it. And that is one of the absolutely key things that we can develop in meditation, especially the mindfulness of breathing. And then we can take that out of our meditation into our life. And the practice of ethics is very helpful there, because instead, again, of being ruled by how I feel at this moment, we decide to be ruled by certain higher principles, which gives us somewhere to stand, which is higher than our passing mental states, our passing moods. So both of those, meditation, especially the metta bhavana and especially the mindfulness of breathing and the practice of ethics, but also something about having a goal in life. One of the reasons Frodo is successful and integrates himself, discovers new resources in himself, he's got a clear goal. So he discovers deep potentials in himself that he would never have found otherwise. When he's concerned with something more important than what he's going to have for dinner. And I think we need to practice having some threads, some backbones in our life that go beyond how we happen to feel at any particular time. And I would suggest in particular taking on commitments that are realistic commitments, and then sticking to them. Sticking to commitments, sticking to goals that we've taken on gives us a sense of, but it's the way we develop spiritual backbone, it's the way we develop integration. So yeah, that's a bit about integration. Positive emotion. Do the metta bhavana. We need to do the metta bhavana. We as Westerners need to do the metta bhavana. Otherwise, we're very likely to be quite cut off individualists. And we need to stick at it, be creative with it, even if we find it difficult. I'm afraid that positive emotion side of the spiritual path is not an optional extra. So we need to do that. And we need to seek friendship. We need to develop friendship. I mean, friendship in a way is what allows Frodo to get to Mount Doom. His friendship with Sam, his friendship with the other hobbits. And it's what allows us to move towards real positive emotion. Emotions aren't something that happen in isolation. We feel them, we develop them with others, and we need a context. So we need to value friendship, to cultivate friendship. It's where we can express more metta, more generosity, etc., in the way we relate. And I would also suggest that devotional practice, puja, etc., and connection with the arts is ways that we can develop positive emotion. And then finally, spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. How do we go about opening ourselves up to that? I think the main way is to step out of our comfort zones, actually. We can live a hobbit-like life where we stay really, really comfortable and have very good dinners. And never do anything that raises any sort of question in anybody's mind. Or we can do things that we would never have thought of doing. We can step out of our comfort zones, and in a sense that is becoming a different person when we do that. And one way to do that, one way to step out of our comfort zones and sort of put ourselves in a different environment that will stretch us, is to go on retreat. So I'm going to recommend going on retreat as a practice. When we go on retreat, we put ourselves in a situation that encourages a whole new way of being. So changing our environment, undertaking a completely new way of being, is a form of spiritual death and a bit of spiritual rebirth. Unfortunately, our next retreat is way overbooked, but hey, there'll be other opportunities. And finally, I think we just need to be receptive to potentials in ourselves. We often have, I think, a voice that points us towards a self that we could be. And we need to listen to it. That's the receptivity coming in. That's a guide to the direction in which our spiritual rebirth may happen. So just those few things. Metta bhavana, ethics, commitment and making commitments and sticking to them. Mindfulness of breathing, got this wrong order. Going on retreat and being open to our, what's called shraddha, being open to our sense of connection with something higher than ourselves. And anyway, I hope that I managed to illustrate that a little bit with the story of the Lord of the Rings, and we'll be exploring it a lot more in the coming weeks through a whole variety of other stories, looking at particular bits in a lot more detail. So I hope that's going to be useful for you.